And welcome back. As we go ahead and continue looking at classes, let's go ahead and look at how we can add primitive type parameters to our methods. So as a review with parameters, you might note that with all our methods so far, they've been constructed with no parameters, which we've indicated by an empty set of parentheses in the method heading. A parameter, therefore, is like a blank that can be filled in with a particular value when that method is invoked. And whatever value we end up plugging in is what we call the argument. Now, we've already actually been using arguments with predefined methods. So, for example, systemout.println, hello world. The hello world portion, that string that is being put in those parentheses, is the argument. Now, what about methods with parameters? How do we actually go about doing this? Well, the class date third try, which we're going to look at here in a minute, contains the method setDate, which has 3 parameters: new month, new day, and new year. It also contains the definition of a method called monthString that has 1 parameter of type int, because you don't happen to have just 1 parameter, you can have multiple. Now, if we were to call either of these methods in another class, let's say, for example, we want to use the values of 6, 17, and a variable called year, and we plug those in for new month, new day, new year. If I were to use my setDate method in my main class, this would look as date.setDate parentheses 6, 17, year. Each of those are representing, of course, the new month, the new day, and the new year. So when we plug those in, the argument, such as 6, is plugged in for the corresponding formal parameter, such as new month, and everywhere that that parameter occurs within that method definition. After all of our arguments have been plugged in for the corresponding parameters, the code within the body of that method is then executed. Now, let's talk about this term, formal parameters and arguments, just a little bit more. So the following invocation of the method monthString occurs within the method setDate. So month equals monthString, new month. The argument, of course, here is new month, which is then plugged in for the parameter month number in the definition of the method monthString. Now you'll note that each of the formal parameters must be preceded by a type name, even if there's more than one parameter of the same name. Same type. So for example, when we look at like new month, will always be preceded, for example, by a string value. Or if you had it set up as an integer, then it would always say int in front of it. Now, this leads to a conversation about type conversion. Corresponding arguments must match the type of their corresponding parameters. Although Java can do some type conversions, such as int into double. And Java will actually automatically perform the following type conversions. It can do bytes to shorts, shorts to ints, ints to longs, longs into floats, and floats into double. This is the same kind of conversion that we have discussed previously for storing variables of another type when we looked at typecasting and coercion. Now, of course, there's also some precedence that takes place when we look at these methods. The correlation between the parameters arguments is directly determined by the order in the list that's in the parentheses. So in method invocation, there must be exactly the same number of arguments in parentheses as there are formal parameters in that method definition. So if you have 3 variables, so to speak, in that parameter in your method, then when you call that method, you're going to need to make sure you pass in 3 variables. Now the first argument is plugged in the first, second in the second, etc., etc. And real quick, you might notice that the main method is actually a void method. We've seen this already. We've seen the heading public static void main string args, which means this is actually a special method that Java uses. The identifier args that we've seen is a parameter of type string array, and string array, of course, is an array for strings. And we'll discuss what it means to have static and arrays later on in this course. But looking at that args keyword, you might see, well, what is this? Well, it's a parameter here. All right, the string array is the type and args is the parameter, and we could technically replace it with any other non-keyword in your program that has the same meaning. So I could have this say string array stuff, and it would still work. Now, when you give a command to run a Java program, the runtime system invokes the main method of the class. Therefore, classes without a main will not be executed directly, and instead are often used as helping classes or used to create objects. Now, parameters are technically local values. So when you plug in those values for a parameter, it's important to note that only the value of the argument is used. In most cases, you can think of parameters as kind of a blank or placeholder that's filled in by the value of the corresponding argument in the method invocation. It's important to note, though, that parameters are not blanks, but are actually local variables, which means they only exist within the context of that method. So when the method is invoked, the value of the argument is computed, and the corresponding parameter is then initialized to this value. And it is occasionally useful to have a parameter treated as a local variable, because then we might be able to use that within the body of our method. Now, a quick pitfall here to note is the terms parameter and argument. You might notice that the term parameter argument so far has been kind of consistent with what's considered to be common usage in the programming world. However, sometimes these terms get to be used interchangeably. Therefore, the term formal parameter is used to describe what we call a parameter, and the term actual parameter is used what we could describe as an argument. And just real quick, let's go ahead and look at this code in Eclipse. You can see we have a date third try class right here. And here is our new method setDate with, you can see we have 3 different parameters here. So we have an int new month, an int new day, and an int new year. So it allows you just to simply enter in a numeric value for the month. But you'll notice what it does when we assign these values inside of setDate, it doesn't just say month equals new month. Instead it says month new string, because it wants to convert that over into the corresponding month value. And so that's what this one does. You notice this, of course, has an int. This one just has an integer value. And so if we look at how, for example, the setDate method is used in our main, you'll see we can create a date third try date. We create a variable called int year, and then we can, of course, call the setDate with 617 in year. I, of course, could have other variables in here for the month and for the date. And of course, I could give them from, for example, user input, and that would, of course, function just fine. But I just want to show you that you can, of course, use these. And if I were to run this program right now, one of the things you'll notice, it prints out June 17th, 1882, because, again, you'll notice it didn't print out 6, because it's as part of that definition for setDate, we have this method here that says month string. It takes whatever that value was, which was 6, looks here to find where 6 is, and it says return June, which means then it's going to assign that to the month variable.